Welcome to my TED Talk. My name is Catherine Kennedy. I'm just going to dive right into it. Instagram and other social media platforms that show visual or aesthetic sites are sometimes considered dangerous, fake news, nothing of real value to be found. This harsh criticism left me wondering about the values these sites really have for individuals and communities. Are we totally wasting our time engaging with this new technology? Have we lost sight of artistic expression and capabilities by placing social capital on these sites? Are we losing sight of what is real and creating these dangerous and unattainable expectations? Do we do this by falsifying images the way public opinion has made it seem? Are we giving up a piece of our authenticity by putting a persona of ourselves online? And should we only consider physical art as true artistic expression? I will be arguing that it does not and should not. Every time a new invention, new idea, or way of artistic expression first comes into conception, it is frowned upon, considered inappropriate or unholy to those who have lived through those transitions. Instead, Instagram is an example of how the function of artistic expression has changed. Over time, as technological advances were made, artistic expression, like gas filling up whatever container it's in, moved onto the internet. Humans have a need to be understood and accepted. Whenever we can find pockets of even virtual spaces like the internet to engage with one another, explore ourselves, we will inhabit those spaces. In our fast-paced world of consumerism, the way we combine aesthetics and marketing to create an app psychologically pushing viewers to buy things does hold value in our capitalist society. This is not so different if you look back at how art functioned in the past. It is used to contribute to whatever society's values are. I will be looking at how art functions within three different systems of social structures to make my argument that it is art's function, not value, that changed when artistic expression began taking place online. The three systems we will be analyzing today are from three different Western societies. Specifically through different works of artistic expression. The Ghent altarpiece created by Van Eyck in 1432 Flanders. Looks like that. The Apocalypse by Albert Dürer, completed in the early 1500s in Belgium. It's a woodblock carving or woodblock panel. And then we'll be looking at Instagram posts from the app that was created in 2010. So we got little edits on those ones. That's Kylie Jenner. Okay. Now I know the jump from one fluid changing of the centuries between the 14th and the 15th century doesn't seem connected to the jump from the 15th to the 21st century, but I think it will be a good way to show you guys, no matter how the function of art may change, the way artistic expression molds to fit the changes of society does not. Now, the three systems we'll be looking at begins with idealized Christian culture, where religion regulates the top-down social structure of European society. Next, we move into a new era for artistic craft, the rise of cities and trade, middle class, new philosophies such as humanism, and invention sparked a curiosity for the otherness and identity. This has never happened before. So lifestyle aesthetics and a wider set of belief system becomes our second system that we'll be looking at. The third system is the one we know and love today. Idealized consumer culture, everything is being marketed to us, for us, and we have so many choices. We get to decide which aesthetic, which religion, which lifestyle works for us. If you want to be a goth or the earthy crunchy type or a class clown. The first system works to instruct their audience. The second system works to explore the individual in relation with others and God. And the third system works to sell. So how do these artistic expressions function within three different spaces? In my research, I want to begin with a look to the rise of mass social media and how that got the ball rolling for constructing virtual realities. To question virtual spaces and how art moves within that, we must first step back in time to the development of mass media products, like the television. In Gabriel Wyman's book, Communicating Unreality, Modern Media and the Reconstruction of Reality, published in 2000, He discusses how, from the time media was being produced, it was also being manipulated by the press to construct a certain meaning, whatever that meaning was. Television is a central system of storytelling. It is part and parcel of our daily lives. Its drama, commercials, news, and other programs bring a relatively coherent world of common images and messages into our home. Television cultivates from infancy to the very predispositions and preferences that used to be acquired from other primary sources. Transcending historic barriers of literacy and mobility, television has become the primary common source of socialization and everyday information. From this, I gather that just like artistic expressions such as naturalism and disguised symbolism conveyed in 15th century Flemish paintings, television was the new facet where distorting the truth for the sake of effective storytelling was the norm. Because someone is trying to convey a story, whether that be through words or art or television, it's all about selling it to the audience. Eliciting an emotional response is a good way to ascribe the person into the construct they are being shown, and in turn makes the version of the truth more believable even when it's faulty. In 14th century Northern Europe, art functioned similarly. Only the nobility could read, but it was important that everyone be an active church member. Churches and patrons were the only ones wealthy enough to commission artwork. Artwork was Flemish society's version of TV. It was essential for people to be able to emotionally connect with a piece in order to understand the love and judgment of God. Artists were coming up with techniques in order to achieve this desired effect. They bended reality as well. Famous religious scenes such as the conception of the Christ child are placed right inside their own cities and towns with their own clergymen at the Virgin's side. These images are also distortions of the truth. They help audience members relate to difficult theological topics on a personal level. Looking at the development of technology as a marker for when our brains started to change and interact with information differently, I found in Nicholas Carr's article, Is Google Making Us Stupid? What the Internet is Doing to Our Brains? He discusses the ongoing issue with how technology has affected our brains. He argues that with the creation of the internet, our brains have altered in our style of reading. Instead of being able to read lengthy articles all the time or a long book, Carr and many others noticed that their attention span has shrunk considerably. He then goes on to say that the internet may have taken away our agency for individual deep thought, and we should be aware of how our minds are changing. This ties back in with Wyman's research because it shows how the advancement of technology that created television led to a consumerist culture. How art functions in our society today will mold with capitalist ideals. Another term that will be used is meditated experience, being able to experience something without a product that tells a story and helps others live or experience it will have an emotional connection that makes it easier to sell. This term is used a lot when coming to discuss reality from fiction. It also is how people sat with art back in the day and had real experiences with it. Something that was also a constructed reality was made real by the skills of the artist. And many social media outlets today, a mediated experience is what most people are living through. They live through their phones and the social constructs that reside there. Who is to say one is more real experience than the other? The article in Business Matter magazines, How Does Instagram Benefit Society, talks about the positive contributions Instagram has had on its users. Some of the things it discusses are the connections people can make. It inspires us, helps us develop skills, etc. I thought this article was interesting because it reminds me of how the artistic community was influenced by inventions back in the mid to late 14th century. The printing press, created in 1410, and the globe in 1492, revolutionized the world, allowing widespread connections by which to communicate. Another piece I looked at was the analysis of the Ghent altarpiece and the Apocalypse wood panel blocks. For the Ghent altarpiece written by the Met Museum, it states the complex theological program is based partially on the literature for All Saints' Day, which included readings from the Book of Revelations. However, no single text has been found to explain the entire program. Rather, the work stands on its own as a visual account of the redemptive mysteries of the Catholic faith, beginning with the incarnation of Christ at the moment of the Annunciation represented on the exterior. this is the interior. Dedicated, inspiring, okay. This goes back to my research about the ways in which 14th century artwork was used as a way to connect with the audience in a way that benefited the church. For the Apocalypse woodblock cuts, the article I reviewed was Smart History's website. The quality of Durer's wood cut is breathtaking. One hears and feels the furor of clattering hooves, and the details, shading, and purity of form are astonishing. Durer's unique genius as a woodcut artist was his ability to convince such complex and finely detailed images in the negative. Woodcut is a relief process in which one must cut away the substance of the design to preserve the outlines. Before Durer, it was often a rather cruder affair. No one could draw wood blocks with the finesse of Durer. The images are astonishingly detailed and textural, as finely tuned as drawings. So influential was Durer's graphic output in both woodcut and engravings that his prints become popular models for succeeding generations of painters. He was a no mean painter himself, producing a varied and articulate array of self-portraits as well as religious works, and turning his mind and his hand to the production of an influential book on perspective. He was a humanist, painter, printmaker, theorist, and keen observer of nature, and is therefore often referred to in popular discourse as the Leonardo of the North, although his actual output was considerably greater than that Italian Renaissance master. I like this article because even the analysis on both pieces gives us interesting detail. The Ghent altarpiece hardly even mentions the artist because Van Eyck's role wasn't the same as Durer's was. Van Eyck shows his advanced skills in a way that is not obvious to the viewer. All they see is a very clear message from the higher-ups on how to pray in a church and what story we should be following. That is clearly the work's piece and purpose. Whereas the Apocalypse description is all about the artist and his personal accomplishments as a master carver, as well as being your stereotypical Renaissance man. This is because the author was being recognized within his community in the same manner this article has written about. People wouldn't have been talking about Van Eyck because his piece had nothing to do with him. In Durer's time, craftsmanship was extremely valued and enjoyed, so that is what he was praised for. And that is also why his art is allowed to reflect that. Van Eyck would totally have the artistic abilities to make these grand pieces of art that Durer was, but it wasn't a part of the culture during his time. Artistic abilities are not getting better or worse, they are simply molding with the times. The first time I remember interacting with Instagram was back in 2012 when I was in the 6th grade. I started using Instagram because I was making the transition from my private elementary school system to the local public middle school. Instagram gave me access to become more involved in the public school kids' lives, as I only knew them through the sports leagues we grew up playing in. It has been meaningful to me by teaching me social norms such as beauty standards, what is politically correct, basically how to act or to be cool. One moment that stands out to me was when the Divergent movie came out. My friends and I dressed up as characters from the story and took a photo. I remember the photo and the memory specifically because when I posted on my Instagram, I had never experienced such a flood of social praise. I had never gotten so many likes or comments on my feed before, and for someone who didn't have a large social sphere at the time, this was a big deal. I immediately became anxious about losing the little following I had, and I stared at the photo and the amount of likes it got. I was obsessed. Of course, after a period of time, the high faded and the urge to post again came back, but I never did supersede the amount of likes I got on that Divergent photo. It was my finest social media moment. This story relates back to my research because it goes to show innovative and creative facets of expression or identity can be found on Instagram. People liked the way I expressed my interest in the Divergent series. They gave me positive feedback, and I knew I was supported. It also goes along with my research that Instagram can be dangerous if not used correctly. I started to use Instagram regularly for over a course of the week. One of my diary entries reads as follows. I found today I was looking at a lot of fashion blogs and more positive messages-oriented accounts. Since using Instagram more regularly, I found myself becoming more inspired to be more proud of my appearance. I've been getting up and getting dressed nicely. I find making yourself look nice on the outside makes you feel good on the inside is very true. I find a version of the perfect life coming together as I aimlessly scroll through my feed for hours, the fast-paced energy of the content sandwiched between ads and links to shopping online. This website feels like its own virtual cosmopolitan paradise. Eye-catching and forgettable, Instagram works in perfecting the aesthetic. Aesthetic is defined as giving or designed to give pleasure through beauty or of pleasing appearance. Back in the day, details and so craftsmanship were considered the ways in which to invoke personal attachment. Now it's the aesthetic that draws the audience in, as we are invested in the idea of the individual. We can draw our own ideas about how to use or interpret the images or art these content creators or artists make. Something about scrolling through this browser section immediately triggers a pleasant feeling in my stomach. The aesthetic is pleasing to the eye. It is cute and reflects the things I aspire either to do, be, have. It can be fun to let your mind explore the possibilities of what can be. I also find I'm not clicking on every photo and examining its details, but scrolling rapidly by the images as a whole. I believe that has to do with my part of the research that talks about how fast-paced our processing centers have developed. It makes it so we can skim through pictures quickly, which I believe is what draws people towards aesthetics. For my cyber ethnograph, I chose to focus on forums to observe Instagram users. I didn't want to do a direct observation. Okay. Subreddit for Instagram users. There was this other subreddit. There was Instagram Reality, which was a forum where people posted edited photos from Instagram with the unedited versions next to them. People were discussing body image issues. People were asking about things like getting hacked, how to get more followers, how to Photoshop, and the general maintenance questions. It reminded me of how art produces new conversations and ideas, going back to our second system when that started to be a thing. It's amazing how one online community produced another online community to discuss how the other one operates. They are discussing things like how to expand the app for things they'd like to see. We as the consumers of a product have the ability to add on to it. This relates back to my investigations on virtual realities and how we can move through the digital world and mold it just like we can to the physical. This breaks down the barrier of what's real and not real. This in turn can be related to my argument that art has simply shifted its popular expression to a digital one, but it doesn't change the way art operates. Artists since the dawn of time worked to connect the audience to their piece of work. This is very similar to a web designer who can go onto one of these platforms and see how the audience is interacting with their work and adjust it accordingly. In both cases, the artist and the designer must accommodate the senses and wishes of the audience to receive the responses they want. A large portion of people seemingly represented on this forum was the art community. An issue I saw coming up repeatedly was that because of the digital era, it's extremely easy to copy and take other people's work. The artists on this subreddit were discussing how it was difficult not to feel discredited for their work. They believe they should be receiving compensation for people using creations they had made. I found this interesting on two levels. I wonder how much control one can expect from a platform that large and anonymous, and also it relates to the importance of artistry and craftsmanship in society, something that came into being during the 16th century Renaissance movement. There was a shift from the late 15th century where artists were more inclined to mask their artistry to create the sense of naturalism that made it digestible and accessible to the audience at the time. But as the world expands around them, new capacities and forms of how the audience can connect lead to a surge of new artistic expression. Instead of just describing scenes realistically in the natural world, how individuals experience the art became one of great importance. An artist's own interpretations or vision for a piece was another way to connect with the audience. We can see how the individual has continuously gathered importance in certain societies today, using the selfie as an example. As art continuously develops to fit the mold of the time, we see an evolution of artistic expression that fits with our world. Now that we live in a digital age, we see how art has changed to adapt new spaces and forums, including virtual spaces like the internet. Instagram is a forum just like Reddit. not just a website that sells things or a place to post pictures of yourself. It's a space where the viewer can dive into different facets of interests of expression. Another thing that I noticed about the forum were the inspirations people were having. There is no doubt that people are forming real connections in these virtual spaces, and that artistic expression is what forms these connections. People posting on Reddit were discussing outfits they could put together, aesthetics, where someone could find a community for photographers online. They discussed different types of cameras and how to play around and discover the best lighting for a shot. People are being inspired to create through these forums. Just as people back in the 16th century wanted to explore their options for expression, so do we. And as we move towards melding with the digital world, the possibilities for artistic endeavors continue to evolve. I wanted to interview somebody about this topic, and I thought interviewing an art student who lived in the digital world would be interesting. I interviewed sophomore at University of Denver, Alexa Miller, to discuss with me her feelings of art and online. I asked if she enjoyed posting on the website. She said, I used to feel like it was a good way of representing myself to my peers that I wanted to be. But she became nervous about it. There was a combo of emotions. On the one hand, she truly doesn't care about what other people think about her, but she still worries about the impression she will make on her Instagram. I don't want to look like an idiot. There's a lot of pressure in our culture just on outwardly appearance. She talked about how culture has made a shift to care more about the appearance rather than the details in terms of entertainment and art. I asked her how her art translated onto an online forum, as if there was any similarities between art being viewed online versus in real life. I remember after our conversation about patrons later that day, I was looking at selfies and thought those pictures are like the patrons paying artists to put them on their own paintings to make themselves look good in the eyes of the community. So in the 15th and 16th century, patrons would pay artists to make images, and a lot of the time these patrons were nobility or rich in the communities, and so a lot of the time these portraits would depict them in super pious positions, kneeling in front of the Virgin Mary or something like that. And it really was a social status thing where anybody can look super religious when they're painted next to a religious image, and people would walk by and see this man and his wife and think that they are really great role models for the community. And so she's making the connection between that and the selfie, and how selfies are basically that way where you can put a social status based on, instead of piety, which was what was popular in the 15th century in Northern Europe, it's about beauty and how beautiful you are. And so that's kind of the standard that we're putting on selfies today. Instagram and other forums like Tumblr and Pinterest have been our facet of expression, the same way that artists were encouraged by their communities to express themselves. But there are differences too. Everybody can do it now, which makes the talent easily drowned out by other nonsense. She believed it's really easy to manipulate the images of yourself online, but people were doing that in the past too. There's a culture online where you're supposed to present yourself as feeling good all the time. Images online are produced more quickly, making them lose a sense of authenticity and technique that makes art, in her opinion, more exciting. It's hard for fine arts to even take a picture and have it look the way it's supposed to. Taking away the ability to produce high quality online forums. She believes Instagram's art movement is about entertainment, not quality, in reference to the experience you are having with the piece. There is an imaginative quality that is hard to replicate in a photo. If you are doing an art forum where you are crafting the setting, you are crafting the subject, it's all represented and done by hand, it's going to look different than a photograph. She usually does not pay attention, but would still be able to tell me what she was looking at mostly when scrolling through her feed. So in the 15th century, there was a shift where artists were more inclined to mask their artistry to create the sense of naturalism that made it digestible to the viewers. Then came Albert Durer's time, and this was towards the 16th century, and there was a rise of technological devices and advancements that allowed people to have more choice in their communities, and a person's own talents were appreciated, and so artistic craft became important. Beforehand, the church wanted people to know how to live by the word of God, and most of art during that time represents that. We can see in pieces like this, it's a complete, all the way up to Adam and Eve, the creation of man, and then down to Judgment Day. The way these people were reading this or able to analyze this was, this is how we get to the kingdom of God type of way. And that's what the function of art was during that time. And it was the only thing allowed to be produced during that time, really. It was the only thing that would have been considered socially acceptable and important pieces. And the techniques that they would use were devices like naturalism and disguised symbolism, things like that, in an attempt to get the people to be able to connect emotionally with pieces like this. It's really hard to visualize God and like what he was doing in the sky. And so this was the way that artists were using their art to be able to describe those types of messages to people. And then this type of art is supposed to emotionally connect with you. You're supposed to look at this and be terrified of the will of God. You see just skeleton men on their horses and the chaos that will come on Judgment Day. It was still heavily into religious imagery still during the 16th century, but there was an expansion where you didn't have to only talk about religious images. You could be drawing landscapes, and you could be discussing sexuality, and I think that's kind of the main difference, is that all of a sudden art is supposed to be a conversation. It's not supposed to teach you, it's supposed to make you think. And so that was kind of the move into that one, and the way that people were able to kind of reconstruct that image for art was they were allowed to use different types of different types of artistic techniques, like, for example, inversion or composition inversion, which is when, like, a lot of the times when you see religious imagery, you'll see Jesus or God kind of in the center. They'll be right smack in your face. And just simply putting Jesus in the background or something, putting really religious figures in the background was a way to, it makes the person have to look through the painting to discover what they're looking for. And so that was just a shift where it's not about, this is what you must learn from this. It was about something else. And then, similarly, we jump to our consumer culture, where art is about how do we sell things. And how do we sell things as we make it look pretty. And so it became about beauty, it became about fast-paced, and it became about being able to digest it quickly and fast and not have it really take away from much of our daily lives and such like that. So, yeah. Art has not gotten better or worse. It has just changed to fit the times. Instagram is simply a product of artistic expression in a fast-paced world. People have lived, idealized, distorted versions of reality since the beginning of artistic expression and scientific exploration. Artists and creative people can see what could be, not always what is. And that leads to extraordinary changes and developments that human beings have been able to achieve. It's not dangerous, but something to be admired and used thoughtfully. There will always be resistance to change, and with a highly driven society like ours, it's important to be aware of where we are trying to go. There are negative drawbacks to having so much access to distorted truth. But we have been given a choice that people like John Van Eyck didn't have. We can choose how to express ourselves, and no confines like physical spaces will stop us from moving to expression online. Thank you.